Welcome, guys, to the last panel for this year's Something Wicked Film Festival 2020. We are doing Directors on Directing. So if we want to go ahead and everyone just introduce themselves and talk about what film you're representing, or I know for both Dave and Steven, they are just expert filmmakers.
Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, my name is Rob Husted. I'm the writer-director of a short film called Lost Treasure of the Valley.
Oh, cool.
That's nice.
What genre is it?
Wow, that's a good question. It's a comedy. Well, it's in the fantasy category, but it's sort of a comedy, fantasy, sci-fi, influenced by Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Repo Man, and Indiana Jones. So that's probably an accurate description.
Okay, this I gotta see.
Oh yeah, I will say, watching it, Lost Treasure of the Valley was great.
Thank you. It
really was great, and a lot of my judges, because I'm also the festival judge, a lot of my judges here they're like, "Wow, I really like this." It was like they first watched it, like, "I don't want to watch it," and then halfway through they go, "Wow, I'm really liking this."
I'm so glad that it's like a surprise too, where they're just like, wow, it's better than I thought it was going to be.
When Kevin,
that's true of most short films.
Oh yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
When Kevin, the festival director, comes in, he'll tell you too, because me and him had a conversation that he's also like, wow,
thank you guys. Oh, I'm so happy you guys liked it. Yeah, as soon as we saw your fest, we were like, this seems like a good fit for, but I have to say, like, this fest, I've been watching the movies, like, the quality is so high, like, not to tangent off, but I mean, we've been, it's always nice to be selected for any festival, but sometimes, like, you're in a fest and it's like, yeah, there were some good ones, but the rest of them were just like, it was like they're friends and they weren't that good, but like every movie that I've watched has been awesome so far. So it's been a kick-ass fest. So thanks for selecting us.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And
I'm Steve Sherwood on the Southern Shorts Awards Film Festival and the Southern Screenwriting Guild here in Atlanta. I produced a number of films myself, short films mostly, and a lot of screenwriting. But yeah, you're welcome to enter our festival, Robert. It's southernshortsawards.com. We actually give Kevin's one of our judges. Every film gets judged by three judges. You get a score sheet and judges' comments regardless.
Ooh, I love that. Okay, the comments are awesome. I am super down. We're definitely going to enter. Thank you.
Not everybody reacts well to them, but
it's good either way. Sometimes they're so bad that it's like, that's hilarious. We have to use that.
Well, that's the thing. We use a 10-point scoring system. It's all based on the numbers, and we've had people that didn't get like 5 or 6 on anything and got no awards. And they were still so grateful just to get feedback.
Oh, sure.
How can you know what you're doing wrong if you don't know what you're doing wrong?
Agreed.
Like, improvement 100%. Requires assessment.
You need to get Steve. You need to get Kevin on that, because I would totally be okay with starting to do that.
I'm always looking for judges, guys.
We'll definitely keep in contact with you. And but moving on, Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Dave. I'm a director, producer, writer. I don't have any movies in the festival this year, but I've done some in the past for Something Wicked. Right now, I'm mostly focusing on screenwriting because of all the pandemic, and I've really been making a lot of progress and learning a lot of new stuff. So, yep.
That's nice. So we're talking about directors directing and all that, and everyone here is directed. So let's just go from get-go. Let's do the easy ball. What inspired you? What inspired you guys to be directors and get into the film industry? And what are some of the inspirations of movies and directors when you're doing movies that you look to? I'll start with Steven and go down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I started way back. My first camera was a Beaulieu Super 8 film camera.
Awesome camera. I had one of those. Those are incredible. Yeah.
Incredible cameras. And then I wanted sound, so I got the kind with the sound stripe on it. Originally, actually, I wanted to write music soundtracks. I could come up with music in my head, and I tried taking, I actually went to University of Tennessee and tried to double major in theater and music composition. But then Music Theory 101 killed it for me because they turned music into mathematics. And it's like, okay, not going to do that. So actually I went from that. I joined the Navy. I became a screenwriter in the Navy, took courses at UCSD in screenwriting and the American Film Institute. And I think science fiction and fantasy has always been what's inspired me. Even since as a kid, I grew up in a tiny town. I went to the library and I found Asimov and Clarke and all the great science fiction writers. And I actually got to meet Spielberg once. I got to go to the world premiere of E.T. and I still have a poster signed by him after the show. And if I'd known now what I knew now, I'd be like, look, dude, I'll clean your toilets, anything, just hire me. But hindsight's always 20/20. But yeah, it's like I didn't write for years and years, and then I joined a local group, which used to be I joined a group called the Blank Page Screenwriting Group locally. And just out of curiosity, after the third meeting, they're like, "Where's your stuff?" I'm like, okay. I started writing, and I can't turn the damn thing off now. In the last decade, I've written a 3-part fantasy miniseries, 4 features, and over a dozen shorts, and we've shot 4 of the shorts, all of which have gotten into festivals. So,
cool.
But yeah, I think the classic sci-fi guys, like obviously Abrams and who's the other guy? Guy that had Firefly.
Oh, Joss Whedon?
Whedon, yeah, the Whedon verse.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Nice.
All right, and Robert?
Well, I had really cool parents growing up. So my mom was super into like classic comedies like Laurel and Hardy and Little Rascals and W.C. Fields and stuff like that. My dad was a little bit more into like the high concept movies of the 80s, but he had this really interesting interest in genre films where even if it wasn't a huge hit, we would sort of behave like it was a huge hit. So a movie like that was Inner Space, which is a really awesome movie from, I think, 1986. Like, it's an Amblin movie. It has the Spielberg pedigree. It's so inventive. It's basically a cult movie on a blockbuster budget. Did not make a ton of money, but I never knew that growing up. I just knew, like, this is an inventive movie, and we should watch this.
Is that Dennis Quaid?
That's Dennis Quaid, Martin Short. It's a Joe Dante movie. So after Gremlins, Joe Dante, like, he was golden boy with Amblin. So he got to make Inner Space, and he got to make Explorers, and I don't think any of them made a dime until like The Burbs. Like The Burbs made some money, but I think, he was just kind of following his passion and making creative stuff. And so I just sort of grew up watching. It was this kind of weird mix of classic stuff and then whatever was happening as I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. And then for a little while, I thought I was going to be a comic book artist because people might not remember this, but from like, I want to say like 90 to like 94 or so, comics were as huge as they are as Marvel movies are now. There was like this crazy, ridiculous comics boom. Like in every small town, there was a comic store. It was completely insane. And it's never really gotten back to that. So I kind of detoured into that for a while. And then I fell back in love with film when I realized I could never draw the same character from a billion different angles just as good. Like maybe cartooning possibly, but so I basically just kind of took all the kind of weird comic influences. There was a lot of really good independent comics back then too. And it all just kind of warped together. And I got lucky enough to go to NYU Film School, but I don't think my education really began until I just started making my own stuff. It's like they can teach you the theory, but I don't know. If I could go back, I had a fun time in college, but I don't know if I'd say that somebody had to completely go bankrupt, having to be taught film. I think especially with all the technology available today, you can probably make your own stuff.
Yeah, that's Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah, exactly. Great book, Rebel Without a Crew. Love that book. That was a huge influence. But I did meet my producer in film school, so I met a lot of people that I worked with later. But so yeah, that's the micro capsule version of it.
What about you, Dave?
So for me, I went to school at Georgia State and I majored in biology. And about 7 years ago, a friend of mine who was a film major, he's like, "Hey, would you like to act in this web series we're doing? Because Georgia State has a TV station. And I said, sure, because when I was younger, I used to really be into screenwriting, and I was like, maybe one day I'd love to be a filmmaker. But back then, I think Georgia just hadn't entered the filmmaking thing yet, so, it was just a dream. So anyways, I acted in the web series, and I realized I really liked film, so I offered to help the filmmakers produce their other projects. And for about a year, I just really enjoyed producing. And in the fall of that year, I co-wrote a comedy web series. And one day we were supposed to shoot. The director was like very sick. So he's like, "Hey man, here's the plan. I'm sick, but I'm gonna bring all the equipment to you, and you'll just have to like direct and do sound and do camera." So I did. I mean, it was a lot of work, but then that day I realized, I really like directing. So I bought a lot of books on directing, like directing actors, on filmmaking, taught myself how to write and direct. And so when I got out of school about 5-6 years ago, I opened up a small production company with some friends, just, making short films and commercials to get practice. So since then, I've been doing that. I haven't done any features. I've just done shorts. And for me, I started off doing a lot of romantic comedies. Like, that's pretty much all I did for like a year or two. And my friends were like, "You're a hopeless romantic, dude." I was like, you know what? I need to like expand. And so I started doing a lot of like thrillers. And today my favorite genres are mysteries, thrillers, and very recently I've really had a thing for coming of age dramas, and also like based on true story or biographical dramas. My favorite directors are Martin Scorsese, David Fincher, and Steven Spielberg. And actually, funny thing, I actually watched E.T. for the first time last Saturday. Yeah. And then since I've been watching a lot of film noir this summer, I've really liked a lot of the older directors, like Orson Welles, Billy Wilder.
Billy Wilder, nice.
Yeah. Carol Reed. Yeah, so that's kind of been my inspiration lately.
Nice. Well, hey Kevin. For everyone knows who Kevin is, he's the director of Something Wicked Film Festival, or co-director. So the thing with directing is that people don't know is there is a certain art to directing. Because I mean, directors, they're the top dog. They're the ones. It's funny because when you see movies and you know, sometimes when a movie's bad, they'll be like, oh, sometimes it's actor. But when a movie's bad, almost 9 out of 10 times when people complain what went wrong, the director is always the one who gets the flack on it. They'd be like, well, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they direct the actor to do this? So directors have a lot on their plate because now they're only like just going, hey, they just tell the actors what to do. They have to worry about camera work. They have to worry about lighting. Every like editing, every form, directors have to worry about that because it's their name that gets put out there. So as directors, how has that been how have you dealt with that pressure when you've made your films, knowing that a lot of the times if this movie doesn't come out well, they're not going to blame so-and-so. They're going to be, it was that guy. It was the director. It's his fault.
Blame the producer.
And the producer.
Well, I really strong in the John Huston thing. You know, what's the most important job a director has? Casting. You know, if you don't get it cast right, it doesn't matter what you do. You can't make the magic work.
Yeah, and I remember I read this anecdote not too long ago. I think it was Quentin Tarantino was at the Sundance Filmmakers Lab, and I think one of his advisors was Terry Gilliam. This is what I was reading, and he was like, Terry, you know, like you create these completely fantastical worlds, like these, you know, like clearly it's like an auteur's vision. Like, how is that possible? Because he was just trying to figure out how to do Reservoir Dogs at the time. He was like trying scenes out from that. And I'm totally paraphrasing, but I think Terry Gilliam was like, Quentin, you don't have to learn how to do all that yourself. You just have to hire people who know how to do all that and explain your vision to them. And if I hadn't heard that anecdote, I think, I would have been a little nervous just to make mine, even for the scale that it's at, because, you know, when I was first writing it, I wasn't thinking about, is this possible? Because there's, spoiler alert, there's a dragon, there's like a hidden temple, there's all sorts of stuff in our movie that like, so sorry to ruin the surprise. Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, well, I don't know. I can't do modeling. I can't do texturing. And I didn't even know what those concepts were, but I just knew that if I was lucky enough to find people that knew all that stuff, as long as I could explain it to them and as long as they could communicate with me about what they were doing, it seemed like it could be pulled off somehow. So the casting thing, I think, is such a great note across the board, like with actors and with the crew. Like, you're casting your crew for the people that they will be able to realize your vision, but they'll make your vision 10 million times better. Like, that was the most gratifying thing. Like, when the movie plays, I'm just like, oh my God, thank God I wasn't the only person doing everything on this. Like, thank God I got so many good people involved. So it seems like that's one of the bigger skills of a director, is just knowing who to collaborate with and who to bring in. There are totally people who can do everything themselves. I don't want to take that away, but I am not one of those people. I think but it's a skill, I think, finding people that you get along with and you can realize your vision with. So that's my long-winded reply.
Well, I'll piggyback on that because when I did my feature, House of Secrets, one of the things that ended up being the best aspect of it is the casting. My cast did a phenomenal job. They took my little bitty crap that I wrote on a script and my vision of doing this thriller, and they made it better, like 10 times better than it was when I wrote the damn thing. And I lucked out with my casting because I was able to get 2 of my main actors to actually end up being there for the casting of the other 3 parts. Because if I didn't have that, if I had hired the wrong people, the relationships would not have rang as true as they do in the final film. Like, casting is it. I don't care who's behind the camera, because that was me for most of it. In front of the camera is what people will see, and I'm like, that's what leaves the impression on audiences. And the director's name when it appears, a Kevin L. Powers film, or a Philip Ray film, or a Stephen Sherwood film. You're right, people will see that first and say, it's his fault. The damn actor,
kill the director
because of him.
Well, that's one of the things I think I tell our judges on my festival is that I think a lot of times actors get bad raps from bad directors because they were just doing what the director told them to.
Yeah.
Can I bring up a specific example that so I've been on this bizarre Chevy Chase kick recently. And it's not just his movies. I'm fascinated by the entire lore of Chevy Chase. Like, somebody who was a star and through their own self-destruction managed to piss off so many people, but he's still so lovable. I would be completely starstruck if I ran into Chevy Chase. So I was sort of looking at a lot of his older movies, and he actually brings up, now I think Three Amigos is a super fun movie. I think it's a blast. He has brought up in several interviews that it is a much funnier movie than, like, the director's cut had all this footage in it that was like hysterical, like the funniest stuff he's ever done. And he was lamenting that all that was left on the cutting room floor. And the movie that ended up getting made that ended up getting released was super fun, but he had a total axe to grind with John Landis. And he was just like, we had all this funny stuff behind the scenes. It could just be lip service, but I think there's totally instances of directors totally getting railroaded and it wasn't their fault and the studio screwed them. But then there's other instances where I think they were self-destructive and they, maybe followed a different muse than the movie should have allowed. And, I love that stuff. Anything that's like a cinematic car wreck, I will absolutely love to dive into. And unfortunately, the directors are usually behind most of those. So
John Landis has had several of his own self-destructive ideals on his films. So
and destructive to other people as well.
Yes.
Sadly, horribly. Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately. And
Yes.
That's a good point to bring up with Chevy Chase and Three Amigos and John Landis. A really good one to bring up, actually. I mean, we're talking about directors here. You know, there are some directors who are self-destructive, and then there are some who just bring the most beautiful imagery out there to the mankind. And then there are those very, very few who can do both at the same time, like Stanley Kubrick. Self-destructive to both himself and actors, but we still love his movies.
Well, that's one of the things that I thought was interesting about Back to the Future. Who was Eric Stoltz was
Eric Stoltz. Yeah.
Eric Stoltz, the original actor.
And despite the fact they had spent the time and money to shoot, 2 or 3 weeks, they had the guts to look at it and go, it's just not working. And, throw that away and start over. And, as independents, we don't get that option. We can't tell people, I need more money because,
But even still, even though a studio was able to do that, can you imagine how horrifying? Like, I give Zemeckis so much credit for that, because at that point, I really like the early Zemeckis Bob Gale movies. I think Used Cars is hysterical. I'm a 1941 defender. I mean, I know they just wrote that, but I actually like that movie. It's amazing set pieces. And I mean, at that point, they were batting like 0-4. I mean, like it was in his best interest to just shut up and just shoot the movie. But he saw something wasn't working. He raised his hand, and I can't imagine how hard that was to say to the studio, "We're going to dump the last few weeks of finished shooting and literally recast it and go with somebody else." Like I think that's an example of a director having an astounding amount of belief in themselves and belief in the movie and belief in the project.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the big thing with directors, is having a vision of what they want to do. Because that's another thing that people who are watching don't realize, that another thing directors have to juggle is a budget. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, gosh, that looks really bad. It looks cheap. Why don't they do that? And then them not knowing, like, hey, this was my budget. This is all I can do.
That's something we had a film this last season, and it was the classic overreach. He was trying to do a sci-fi film that was just, he showed great 3D exterior shots of the International Space Station, then cut to interiors with concrete block walls, and just the worst. It's like, dude, I know what you tried to do, but knock it down to what you can do, because otherwise we're so distracted watching this going, okay, they have ladders and gravity and zap guns. And I said, look, put it on Mars next time or something, where you've got a building you can go on. But I think that's it. It's like you're talking about the kid that makes short fantasy or fan films, like in his house at the spur of the moment. It's like, well,
you're hilarious sometimes, Sherwood.
Garbage out.
I think, like, talking about good budget, is actually Lost Treasure of the Valley. It's a good example. So, you did what you could with your budget, and it gives it character. Like, you don't always have to have like the biggest budgets. You can do what you can, and it gives a character. That's what I loved about Lost Treasure. It's just like, I love, like, again, like, you've got the Guardian come out, and he's got a shopping cart and all that, and it just gives it character to it. And
thank you.
Directors who don't understand, they go, well, I only have $500. That's the best I can do. It's like, sometimes you can do, like, sometimes you watch a film and go, yeah, I see exactly where your hands were tied. And then sometimes they go, well, I needed more money, because we see this a lot in Hollywood, where they're obsessed with getting so much money, but then you don't really see it anywhere. You're like, okay, this is $28 billion, but this could have been shot less than that.
Like, where is it? Why is it not on the screen? Now, I've always wondered this. Maybe somebody here knows this. One of my favorite endings that seems like it's going to be a huge ending, and then it's completely cheap, but it's hilarious. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's building up to this like epic thing, and then like the cops come in and shut it down. And I was like, I'm 100% positive that was a joke in the original script to begin with. They knew they were going to do that. But if that was a compromise, it's the greatest compromise because it's hilarious and it completely works. And I remember reading too for, not to go on a Gilliam kick, but for Baron Munchausen. He was directing Baron Munchausen, which, freaking awesome movie. I think he had like this huge scene that he wanted to shoot at the moon. His budget was cut because, I think that's like a horrific story. His producer was like stealing money or something like that. And I think in the end, it's like he took the designs for what he wanted to do, which were drawn with like marker or something. And he just like ran them past the camera on strings. Like he found this totally weird handmade solution that somehow worked. And I think that's another mark of a good director is like, okay, this is a horrible compromise, but or frickin' De Palma with the staircase sequence in Untouchables. That was a compromise. Like I read that there was a whole train battle that was supposed to happen in the Untouchables and couldn't do it. Mamet refused to rewrite it. So De Palma was like, give me a staircase. Like, we'll just go Potemkin.
We're talking about low budget, the classic Dark Star.
Dark Star, Carpenter.
Dark Star,
where the alien was a beach ball with
Yeah.
Yeah, it got claws, and you're like, what?
But it works.
That was Carpenter's college. That was Carpenter and his guy's college film that just happened to actually find a real distributor. But think about it: a college student and his friends coming up with Dark Star. They're like, really?
It was an interesting concept. They had to talk the bomb out of blowing up, which they didn't.
That was and they got it distributed. And I think, wasn't it shot on 35? Am I crazy? Or did they actually raise money? Or maybe it was 16. But either way, it's amazing they got a college feature distributed. Like, that's nuts.
I'm sure it was shot on 16 or 35 because back then, even I was still shooting on film and not digital yet.
The film days. So much fun.
Yeah.
So
Dave, because Dave went to Georgia State also years after I did, he did everything digital. When I was at Georgia State, we were still freaking shooting on film.
Yeah, everything was digital for sure. We're shooting on T4Is.
Oh no! So Dave, you never got the joy of like using like a 16 millimeter flatbed because the tape edits are so frustrating, but it's so much fun to see 16 on a flatbed. It's like, oh man, it smells real. It's tactile. It's expensive.
Yeah, try Super 8 film where it's this big.
Yeah, Super 8. Jeez.
Super 8. Oh, dude, Super 8. I played with some of the Super 8 editors, and I'm like, how did people ever edit on Super 8? Especially Super 8 sound film, which I wish I got to play with. Like,
which the audio track is 18 frames in front of the. It was a nightmare.
Oh my god! So there's a delay. That's crazy.
Yep.
Wow. Ugh.
So that goes to the next question. As we've seen in the last couple of years, as the exact topic, technology has changed. So over the last 20, 30 years, 40 years, it's crazy. And so as directors and people, as filmmakers, how has, in your eyes, directing evolved since you guys first started? Have you seen directing evolve? Because, now there are times before, like, a director had to be on set. You had to be there. You're always hands-on. And now you hear stories sometimes the director is just being off on the side in the tent, just watching the entire time.
I had that was one of my first times I was on, I was a local shoot. It was Kevin Williamson. Turned out to be The Following with Kevin Bacon.
Ooh.
And they were shooting in an old supermarket that they had taken everything out of. And I worked with video playback. So they had all these screens. It was supposed to be the FBI had set up this field station. And the director was over inside the building in a tent. And the kid, he plays the ice guy in X-Men, I forget which one he is, he was self-directing. He was doing takes by himself, and he had kind of look around for feedback and go do it again. And I never even saw the director. And it's like, what the hell? Then I worked on Necessary Roughness.
What? The football movie? That's hilarious.
No, the series.
Not the
football
series.
I was like the Kathy Ireland, Scott Bakula
football
movie. Okay, all right.
This was the TV series about this doctor or lawyer, whatever she was. I didn't really watch it. But the director is there with his two cameras right next to the lens. So there's completely different. When I started, there was no feedback. I shot a whole series of commercials for Nissan trucks in 16, and my good friend Steve Anderson was the DP, and we're shooting in 16. There is no feedback. I totally have to trust what he's seeing. We had shots at dusk that I thought we were going to have to reshoot because it was dark. He pushed the film in the lab. I'm like, holy shit. He brought it right out. Now you're like, all right, can you tweak that? Real time. You guys are spoiled.
You're talking about you, Dave.
Yeah, no, like Kevin was saying, like, I never experienced anything else other than digital. Like, I went from Canon T4Is to Blackmagics, and I guess it's just fortunate, being there and seeing, when people mess up and you could just do redos. I can't imagine how people did it before then.
Well, that was the problem. We didn't always catch
Yeah.
when there was a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah,
now
maybe
you've got multiple
developed.
eyes in real time. And wasn't Jerry Lewis one of the first guys to start using on?
Yeah, I think he did. Didn't he like invent the video tap? I read that he did that, but maybe he just had the patent for it or something. But yeah, it's funny because you're making me think of out here before the bizarre science fiction film that we're all living in right now happened, back when movies were in theaters. I went to a screening of this director that I really like, Alex Cox. So he did Repo Man, Sid and Nancy. He did this amazing movie called Walker with Ed Harris that pretty much destroyed his career in Hollywood. And then one of the last movies that he shot on film was this really amazing film called Highway Patrolman. And he shot it in, I wish I could remember the name of the style, but I think it was sort of really championed within Mexican cinema. And it's essentially every scene is one take, but it's not static. So you're getting all of your movement in camera movement, but you're not cutting. And that's how every scene exists. And I can't imagine how terrifying that was to get back and look at the dailies, because he was shooting on 35, but it also must have been like a huge relief if it worked, because it's like, oh man, that's awesome. I mean, we have our regular color timing, but we're done. Like we got it. Like we don't have to sit there and mess with power windows and all this stuff. Like we can just, there's no DI. We can just sit there and it's just done. Like I mean, I definitely remember when I was in the color on my movie, and I was super happy with it, but I was thinking this would be so amazing if we just aimed to get everything in camera and that was it. I mean, there'd probably be a lot of mistakes that you'd have to live with sometimes, but it must have felt like such a relief back in the day.
Well, it's we get films where it's all in one shot. It really doesn't impress me because it's like, first of all, you're limited to one constant view. Right. And if anything goes wrong, the further along you get, the more time you're going to waste redoing it. Or there maybe was the better take. But one of the things I just wanted to point out as a director that's, for me, very important is a script supervisor.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the things you've got to offload, because one film I shot, Passing Sci-Fi, the one night we didn't have a script supervisor, I didn't realize I didn't have the shot until I got to the edit. And it was a cutaway reaction shot. And so now I'm scanning through pre-roll on everything, and I found a pre-roll where the guy made the motion, so I grabbed that and put it in. Now, you wouldn't know watching it, but I was sweating bullets. And if I'd had my script supervisor there to make sure I got the damn shot, I wouldn't be, messed up with it. But it's something you can't skimp on.
Yeah.
Continuity. Ugh. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're talking about, a director's vision and how they achieve their shots. And, of course, you mentioned the one take. one take person, which can work on certain people. You have Birdman. You have Birdman.
Oh, Birdman, yeah.
Or Roma. You look at Roma, and Roma is done completely as wide shots, and it pans, and it's a beautifully shot film. I don't know how they achieved all that crap in that movie. I still don't know, because there's so many exterior shots. There's so many people. But it's a beautifully crafted film, and that's a conscious effort from the director. He's saying, well, you know what? This is the style of this film here. I'm going to do this for the whole film. and not do cutaways. But then you have someone like Baz Luhrmann, who, if you watch his Romeo and Juliet, boom, 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 he's got cuts everywhere. There's close-ups everywhere. His style for that movie is so dynamic. The one reason why people enjoyed this so much is because you're like watching this action-packed movie and this freaking Romeo and Juliet of all movies. I was like, he wanted to infuse that story, which we all know and we all sleep through, with some type of dynamic vision. You know, I hope one day I can be like either one of those two directors, because they have a very unique vision for each of their films and style. But I haven't done enough to establish my own style yet, because I'm like everyone else. I'm trying to figure it out. I've seen a bunch of movies.
Well, if I could just jump in and to split the diff between those two, because you mentioned Kubrick, I can't think of another director who did this. Barry Lyndon. If you see Barry Lyndon, who else has done that where he does push-outs? I mean, he's like, he gets you into the time period by pulling out, by starting in tight and pulling out. And I can't think of another director that's done that. Like, as far as yeah, there's a lot you can do. I mean, I know that wasn't a one-take movie, but it's
but it was all shot with available lighting.
Well, you know, they used a lens developed by NASA that was a 0.9 lens. You can still rent that lens now.
Really? It's still there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think it was expensive as hell to make.
It was. Well, he was shooting on a new type of film stock to shoot in available lighting, because he didn't want to use all the exterior fake lighting, which is why it's a beautiful film. I don't remember much of what the frick it's about, because that's one of my least favorite of his films. But when you're watching it, it is a beautifully crafted film, and it's like
gorgeous, yeah.
But the story is not really as one of my favorites at all. But yes, it's a really beautiful film, director style.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I think there's definitely Kubrick people for his earlier films and his later films. I'm in my travels, I am meeting more earlier Kubrick film people. Like, and it's funny because I saw his later films first, and I was like, wow, these are amazing. And then I was like, oh my God, Paths of Glory is incredible. Incredible. I'm sorry to admit I still haven't seen The Killing, but it is on my list. It's really pathetic that I've not seen it. I know, I hate myself, but
I haven't seen it either. But, well, to go the opposite end on fast cutting, Michael Bay. Yeah, I mean, what was it in the 60s or 70s? The average cut was 12 seconds. His average is 3.
Although I will
60 cameras allows him to cut every 3 seconds.
Yeah, but I will defend The Rock to the death, because I think it's the only movie that is the perfect marriage of material and his style. It feels like it would have been a Frankenheimer movie in the 70s. It would have been paced very differently, but I think that's maybe like that and Pain and Gain, I think. But he's definitely not for all taste. But yeah, he's definitely he is Mr. Fast Cut for sure.
Have you guys seen the making of 1917?
No.
Yeah.
How is that?
Well, I haven't seen the film yet, but I follow Studio Binder, and they do a lot of like making ofs, and I watch a documentary of how they shot the film, and they used a lot of natural lighting, and they shot everything. It was a one-take film, but they had to use a lot of cool techniques. Like they would cut. There was a scene where they went into a trench, and they had to like get a camera on a clothesline or something and slide it down to get. But it was very interesting how they shot it. And there was a scene where like they needed to be guided by fire at night. So they set the building on fire as like flare, and yeah. And
one take.
Yeah. They also shot flares in the sky, and they had to wait until the light got to the perfect position, and then it'd be like, all right, action, and then cut. Keep shooting up flares. I thought it was very interesting how they made it and then shot it in one take.
Well, to go back to the thing about technology, you should watch the behind the scenes on The Mandalorian. They have come up with a system now that it's a 270-degree surround video screens and ceiling, and all the backgrounds are being generated in real time in 3D imagery. So that when they shot scenes in The Mandalorian, he's on that set. So that the huge advantage is instead of green screen with green spill and all that, you're getting projected imagery that actually reflects in the reflective surfaces. Like I showed a motorcycle. And so the background was reflecting on it, and you got programmers backstage that have built this whole 3D world that syncs with the camera. And it's much faster. You get it in one shot. There's no post. And they shot a lot of The Mandalorian that way. But it's an expensive setup.
Yeah.
But you can tell where it's going to save so much money on doing a lot of scenes because like you can put stuff in the foreground, but that whole background is being rendered in real time as you shoot. So you see what you're getting and you're done.
You know what makes me sad about that is like I think like what would Ken Russell have done with that? What would John Borman have done with that? Like the truly crazy like adult auteurs, like they would have just destroyed us. They would have warped our minds.
Yeah, Ken Russell especially.
Yeah, can you imagine Altered States with more VFX? Like that would I already feel like I'm on drugs watching that. Like
that was
or Zardoz.
Well, another thing too, technology we're seeing is something like we saw in the Will Smith movie. They just did
Gemini Man.
Oh, Gemini
Man, where again that was a movie that they've been waiting for years to try to do.
Wow.
For the technology to catch up, and finally it caught up and they were able to do that. And now something we may be seeing in the near future. Again, we've been seeing it in Star Wars with Leia and all of that is dealing with computerizing actors, and we're seeing it too in certain movies now and TV shows like the Boondocks. When they're doing their new one, the actor who played the grandpa is dead. I forgot his name. But what they're doing is instead of casting a new actor, they are just doing a fake reel. They're just doing the whole taking every line he's ever said and just mashing it all together. And like you can look at videos of deep fakes of people like making it look like an actor's actually there. They're not there. So we might be seeing that again. And directors, that'll be another thing that we might be seeing directors deal with in the next upcoming future.
We already see that. Marvel and Disney has been paying for that in all the Avenger films. You do know half that cast is not on the set when you're watching these movies, right? They're all CGI.
Well, just to piggyback off that, I was lucky enough. He didn't work on Lost Treasure, but I was lucky enough to work at Technicolor with one of the VFX technicians who put Brandon Lee's face onto a stunt double in The Crow, which was one of the, I think, one of the first, big ones where it's like the actor, this horrible Bruce Lee curse tragedy where he passed away, and they got a stunt double to complete it, and he was explaining to me how they did it, and he's just like, we were using, I think it was the system called like Paintbox or something, like something, it's like the Sega Game Gear to Da Vinci or something, like some insane VFX
it's like
system.
Captain America. They knew they had done it right when people said, how did you make him look so pumped up? And it's like, he wasn't pumped up. We made him look skinny and shorter. Like, what? So they used that, but they also had a body double that they put the face on in some of the shots.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Astonishing.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But it's all big money.
Yeah, I mean, us independent filmmakers, we can't do that just yet. Our visions have to be a little bit smaller to accommodate our visions. All right, so our budget, our vision has to be small enough to accommodate our budget. That being said, we have to think outside the box and use the tools that we have at our disposal, which is great because we just have to be more creative. That's our job. We're really creative.
I was before this panel, we're doing the cinematography panel, and the DP for Witch Hunters was talking about. We were talking about how cameras evolved, and we talked about it a little bit in this conversation. He was showing us how now, like again, there's a lot of cheap stuff. You got cheap lights that you can use. You have LED lights now instead of having to use the old floodlights now.
Those are a godsend. Those LED lights, they're the best.
Yeah.
That's been new. Cameras have been smalling. Now you have GoPro, so now you can put cameras in places before that you used to not be able to do.
I haven't watched any of the Fast and Furious, but supposedly they buy them by the dozen. They put GoPros all over the cars, and what it would provide they can use some of the footage from. So
But
when they're not using CGI cars, of course.
yeah, that's true, which is most of the time.
The parts of the last two were shot in the Georgia World Congress Center, from what I hear, with green screens everywhere. So,
I did not see Hobbs and Shaw, but I will defend to the death the last Fast and the Furious before that, where they have a submarine chase with cars. I'm like, this is G.I. Joe. I cannot not like this. This is awesome. This is so much fun. How can you not enjoy this? But it's definitely CGI. It doesn't feel, real. But then, like, Nolan will build models. Like, I remember in Inception, that fortress at the end, I'm pretty sure that was a model. I'm sure there was CGI, components to it. But it's great that if you have the money, you can pay for the physical stuff.
Well, that's the other thing I'm getting a little into is 3D printing, because if I want to make 3D props, instead of paying some fortune, I can, once you get a CAD file, you can print out the object on your 3D printer, but then make a cast from that. So you can get stuff done in real props much cheaper than you used to. It's like my last sci-fi film. I went to a prop shop locally in Atlanta, and they started at $1,500, and it's like, no, you don't. So my interface for my aliens was an LED strip on a headband of metal that I had made up with a battery pack. I had to hide the pigtail behind his neck.
Nice.
And then I found out that I was shooting on camera, and the blinking wasn't matching what was showing up on my screen. I'm like, what the hell? It was shutter speed difference.
Yep.
So then I had it fade up and down instead of blink, and it worked. But that cost me like $50. So
That's not bad. You know what that reminds me of? In Scarface, I remember reading this. This was how crazy it was back then, for all the machine gun fire at the very end. And it might have just been all the regular gunfire, just in the final siege on Tony's palace. I remember reading that they had, now I can't remember if it was a timer for the camera or if it was a timer for the flashes themselves, but they somehow figured out a way to make every single muzzle flash visible. And it was some kind of horrific analog solution that was probably like high technology in 82. But I'm sure at the time it was amazing, but I'm sure it was a huge pain to accomplish.
That goes to a point that one of my pet peeves about people using airsoft guns, besides really bad effects of the muzzle flash, is that, and this is the director's problem, have them go to a range and shoot a real damn pistol or rifle before, because there's something called kickback.
That's true.
And people go like that or sideways and no reaction at all. And it's at least act like the thing's pushing you back.
Right.
You got to sell it.
Yeah, there's a flinch that's involved.
I'm hardcore. I don't flinch.
I'm steady every time. Just keep it steady. Yeah, it's like, wow, he's really ice cold. Like, man, he's.
Oh my god.
So,
All right, Philip, I'm gonna let y'all keep talking. I gotta go do one more interview. All right.
all right.
Hey, bye, Kevin.
Hey,
Great talking again. Yay.
So talking again about directors and all of that, and we keep mentioning directors, and one big thing is we remember the big directors because they had their style. We talk about Kubrick's style. We talk about Steven Spielberg's style early on. We talk about Quentin Tarantino's style. Christopher Nolan, their movies because they have a style. And really, at a point, the best directors have some form of style to a point, and they develop it at some point. Kevin made a mention about how when that he saw and figured out a style. So as filmmakers, how are you trying to develop a style that when if you ever get famous, you want to be like, I know that was his movie because it was that style.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Talk amongst yourself.
Hey. I think Dave should start with this one. I think
For me, so I've just been watching a lot of older films. Like I did a series where I was like watching all of David Fincher's films and making notes on what makes David Fincher's film a David Fincher film. And I kind of did the same with Spielberg. So for me, I mostly cinematography I focus on right now, and color. I'm still trying to figure everything else out. But yeah, I'm getting there. I haven't figured out my style yet. I started off as a actor's director because I only had focus on the performance, and I told my cinematographer to handle all the cinematography. Then over time, I started sitting down with my cinematographers and be like, all right, let's storyboard this thing out. We should use this camera for these shots. We should use this camera for this other shot, and this is how everything is going to cut in the editing. Um, so yeah, and for me, a lot of my directing so far has been collaboration because I realize how important collaboration is. Because a lot of times you might be married to a certain idea, but it's good to be open to collaboration, and you like your DP's idea or your sound or AD or something, because a lot of times it could work better than what you had planned. Because sometimes in the editing room something doesn't work, but then you have a backup. So for me lately, I've mainly been watching a lot of thrillers, films from like the 40s and 50s, the film noirs. Watch a lot of neo noirs, and also been watching a lot of like critically acclaimed films, like Oscar-winning films. And I'm like, all right, let me dissect this. How did they win an award? And then I'd be like, okay, yeah, I could see this working, I could see that working, and yeah. So I don't have a style yet, but I feel like I'm getting there. I'm studying other people's styles right now and slowly crafting my own.
I think mine is, I'm principally a writer. So I think I want to direct what I write. So a lot of what I would consider my style is involved in the writing of the story and how I'm going to tell that story. But yeah, not specifically a style, it's just what I believe is the most effective way of storytelling, visually and through the words of getting my story across to people. I mean, that's one of the things I tried to do with my last sci-fi film. I wanted to make a sci-fi film that would actually make people cry at the end. And I actually got to watch some audience, because at the end, the old guy has to die, and I watched people tear up. I was like, okay, what I did must have worked, or they wouldn't have had that empathetic connection to them. But it was really hard to do. And again, I'm relying heavily on those actors to bring that home for me, or it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of what you just said. I think, my writing style, everything that I write tends to be, I think my producer John actually summed this up really well. It's finding the magic in the mundane. So there's, kind of a magical realism element. So when I was sort of trying to develop the style for Lost Treasure, I kind of backtracked and I looked for directors that also made films like that. And filmmakers like Joe Dante and Alex Cox, and my movie's actually, believe it or not, inspired by a movie that's never been officially released. It's the very first SNL movie that Paramount buried for completely unknown reasons.
Wow.
If you guys have ever seen, so there was a director that did a couple of old SNL sketches. There's a Chris Farley sketch where he drinks decaffeinated coffee crystals, but it turns out that they lied to him. It's like a hidden camera type thing, and he flips out. There's an old Belushi sketch where he plays an old man. Anyway, he was a director of SNL type stuff, and he made this amazing movie called Nothing Lasts Forever, and it's supposed to look like a 1930s movie set in the future. And Bill Murray is in it. He plays he plays an evil bus driver on a bus that goes to the moon. It's like a totally magical movie, and you can find bootlegs of it, but it's never been officially released. But essentially, I always had a big love of cult movies, and I think what I've always tried to do, or what my ultimate goal is recapturing the feel of movies that I saw as a kid that were cult movies that I never knew weren't huge hits, that always to me were huge hits, like that movie Inner Space. Like when I was a kid, I was like, wow, this is what a blockbuster looks like. It's totally idiosyncratic, whimsical, but yet there's this very real kind of gritty element to it, and it's a comedy. So as far as directing, I mean, I think most of the directors that I like, they brought a lot of movement to their movie. I mean, movement is something that you don't have to have a huge budget for. You just have to have a really kind of agile DP. So I remember seeing a movie called The Long Goodbye by Altman that just has, so much movement. I mean, there's so many scenes that are just, tracking in or tracking back and going back and forth. So I think without having a blueprint of exactly the style that I was going to use, I just knew that I wanted to have a lot of movement and I wanted to emulate those other directors that had that similar tone to their style. And it is still a work in progress, kind of like what Dave is saying, where, I'm still kind of, looking for a light switch in the dark a little bit. But that's the great thing about making movies is like you can make something, somebody can see something that you didn't even intend to be the intent, and then they're just like, that was genius that you thought of that. And it's like, wow, I guess that's my style. I guess I kind of subconsciously did that, so that's my style.
Yeah, I think a lot of directors, they don't consciously think about style. It's just the way they interpret the world and how they reveal their stories. But one of the pet peeves I wanted to bring up was what has become the super cliche, because almost every short film we get has a damn drone shot in it. Whether it's motivated in the least, it's like just because you have a drone doesn't mean you have to use the drone.
Production value, yeah.
I had a guy that had the drone so high, I couldn't figure out who I was supposed to be looking at because he didn't want to hit this giant statue. So he's like 300 feet in the air, and there are little dots down there. I'm like, dude, what the?
Like the CIA assassin length, where it's like, this is where they drop bombs on people. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because my DP was pushing for so many drone shots. And I was like, I think we should split it. I think we should have all the drone shots. And it turned out to be kind of half budgetary, half creative intent. But I was just kind of like, you know what? Why don't we keep all the drone shots kind of in one location? I mean, let's make that one location the really big location. And they turned out to be necessary because, in some cases they were POV shots of a creature that's coming after somebody. So it ended up working out for the best. But I'm really happy that we didn't do any of the drone shots for, like, say, a lot of the street level stuff, because I feel like it would have cheapened the other drone shots. So I think you're right. It's something that you can get your hands on now, and it's like Steadicam, back in the day where people weren't as judicious with it as they could have been, and in some cases it's unnecessary. And I think people are going to look back and 20 years from now and be like, why are there so many drone shots in all these movies?
If it distracts you, if it makes you think about what they're doing, you're out of the movie now.
Yeah, you're right.
Immersion's all that's important. But I think that's a good stopping point for today. So thank you guys for joining us for this panel. Thank you guys for the thoughtful discussions. It was really good. Still, the festival's not over yet, so if you haven't watched everything, continue to watch everything.
Working on it.
Thank you, Robert, coming. I loved Lost Treasures. And
Thank you.
I know you, as a festival judge, that a lot of the judges also enjoyed it.
So, so glad. Thank you so much. This was a blast. Let's do this every week. I think we got a podcast here.
So, all you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend and enjoy the rest of the festival, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. See you guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.